Welcome back to another Beyond the Prompt teaser. This one is with Dan Klein, professor at Berkeley and CTO at Scale Cognition. And he makes a pretty uncomfortable point that these models are built to sound fluent, not necessarily to be correct, which means the better they get of sounding right, the harder it actually becomes to know if they're wrong. And I think that changes your role completely because suddenly you're not just asking questions, you're the editor, you're the fact checker, the one who actually has to be sure that it's right. The full episode is actually live right now. I hope you enjoy it.
Hi, I'm Dan Klein. I'm a professor of computer science at UC Berkeley and CTO at Scale Cognition. I'm excited to talk to you today about hallucinations and reliability in AI.
Jeremy Utley.
I'd put this one more in the hot takes category, probably,
Yeah.
actually, Henrik. What do you
Yeah.
think? I feel like it's a little bit more of a contrarian perspective. His whole, just for folks who haven't listened yet, who are teasing, who want to be teased, we talked to Dan Klein, who's a professor at Berkeley and the CTO of Scale Cognition. Yeah, and one of the things that he was basically saying was what looks like an exponential many times is an S-curve, and what folks are calling the exponential in the AI wave, his contention is we're in the exponential portion of an S-curve because of hallucinations and kind of in what he considers to be inherent limitations of the scale approach. But anyway, so it was it was a hot take. What do you think, Henrik?
You know, one thing, the biggest takeaway I think I had from it is I remember once I was reading a finance newspaper that we have here in the Scandi market, and they were writing about some startup stuff. And as I was reading, I was like, oh, they really don't know anything about startups. They really don't. Like everything, the way that everything was phrased was just it was very clear that they completely misunderstood everything about startup and financing and stuff like that. And then I was like, hey, wait a minute. If there's this wrong about this thing that I know a lot about, I wonder how wrong they are about other stuff too. Right. And I think what he was just making was the exact same point with models. And I hadn't really completely thought about it because I love using these models. I use them increasingly kind of like I trust them more and more just to give me the right answer. But he made this point of saying the population at Berkeley is, and the model will basically have a guess, right? Like, and then it'll put something out. It might be right, but it's probably wrong. And then so he was suggesting that you should write something, you should ask it something you know a lot about, and then kind of understand its limitations.
Just to calibrate. Yeah. I mean, to me, I think the one caveat, can I put one caveat there? Because I really agree with that tactic and I actually love it as a starting point. Say, have a conversation about something that you know deeply to explore the kind of jagged frontier, so to speak. The caveat is I would never recommend someone have a single shot interaction like quiz AI and then see, oh, is its response good? That is demonstrably poor AI collaboration behavior. I think what you want to do instead is engage and respond and give mentorship and feedback and guidance and recognize, wow, the AI is fully capable of evolving its understanding based on what I input.
But I think that's leading to a second point, which something you obviously talked a lot about, that you shouldn't kind of be working on AI or with AI. You have like this phrase about just making sure that this is a omnidirectional kind of thing that you go back and forth with. I think what he was talking to is that people have to change how they work, how they think about what their kind of function is in a workflow. And it used to be that, and going back to journalism, you can be a writer, you can be an editor, and it's completely two different jobs. Now, a writer most likely don't know how it is to be an editor, and an editor might have forgotten how it is to be a writer. And increasingly, that when AI is basically giving us this world of abundance, you now have to teach yourself how to be an editor. And I think you were kind of talking to an editor's function, which is just told you how many people lived in Berkeley. What you would normally go like, hey, I wonder if the writer has actually checked that, right? And so you go back and say, hey, could you please double check that number is legit? At which point the model obviously will do a web search and then probably come back with the right number or correct. But that is, I think, something that most people are not trained to do. And so I do think that the conversation had this interesting kind of like insight for me is that we're just kind of used to work in a world of scarcity. And now we're going to be living in a world of at least generative abundance. And we then have to train ourselves to be good at being stubborn about really want to have excellent outcomes because it's going to be easy just to take the
Right.
first one. We have to be stubborn to be an editor of things that comes at us because we have to be the one who would basically the fact checker because the model will obviously just say whatever and all those different things. And so I thought that was pretty interesting too.
I think it's a worthwhile paradigm is his discussion around digital literacy and seeing AI fluency as an extension of digital literacy. So that's a powerful thing. And then furthermore, to realize that some of the ways in which we have learned digital literacy are actually a disservice to us. And, comparing Googling versus working with AI, things like that. I thought it was fascinating to think about the fact that so few organizations are investing in skills. And I wrote something down here. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, this idea of new management training is something that organizations provide folks who've been given teams. Nobody's getting new manager training now that they've been given the AI team. I think that that's a really interesting paradigm. And knowing, for example, how to delegate is itself a skill. And if you are a poor collaborator to AI, or if you don't know how to delegate, then you're not going to be able to be successful in a collaboration with this intelligence, not because the intelligence isn't capable, but because you lack the managerial skills to derive the best possible work from this new teammate. I thought that was pretty interesting.
A small thing that he brought up, which also I think is just interesting, is that we are trained to spot things that are untrue on the normal web, partly because I think we're visually trained. Like if you go into a website where there's endless amount of banner ads and pop-ups, I think your brain now just goes, this is probably not a very legit website. But we're used to that things that comes over in a chat window is kind of probably from a friend or it's condensed. And so things that are written out that is lengthy is something that is real thought through because that is what we've seen before. And so I think there's also like
shorthand.
in the visual kind of the interface design, there's something seductive in the chat that makes us think that is real.
It triggers our impression of thoughtfulness, or he said, I think the word he used was fluency, but the appearance of truth is something that's difficult for us to discern when we are in edit mode, or especially if we don't know that we're in edit mode. I think it's pretty cool conversation. I think it's a unique conversation in our canon in terms of really focusing on understanding hallucination. What is it? When is it a feature? As he said, sometimes hallucination is the product, right? It's actually the point. And when you're not looking for a regurgitation of something that already exists, but you're actually looking for something new, de novo to be generated, hallucination is a feature, not a bug. But then there are other times when your goal is retrieval effectively, that hallucination is a problem. And thinking about when is what system best. I love his point that, if a reasoning system effectively just solves a problem 10 times and selects the best one, the person paying for the 10 at-bats probably doesn't like that. The person being paid for 10x the token usage probably loves it. And now I think it's slightly a cynical view because I think, as far as I understand it, the model companies are largely losing money on reasoning queries and things like that. So I don't think they're like getting rich off that, but I think it's an interesting paradigm to realize. His example of learning French from a French book is very much better and more effective than learning French from incidental French phrases in an English book.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I thought it was good too. Awesome. I think that's conclude the conversation today. So, Jeremy, you do the backing at the end of this episode.
What we need, folks, are enthusiastic shares and reviews. I was reminded of, Henrik, I'll just make a plug for a former episode, our conversation with Muhammad Ali, the head of consulting at IBM. I was thinking about some of the things they've done in terms of treating themselves as client zero, proving the economic impact, deploying teams to internal workflow optimization, redeploying freed up labor to revenue producing lines of business. It's a really cool example. And if folks haven't heard that interview, they should go back and listen to that as well. But with that, as always,
Only one thing to say, and that is bye-bye.
bye-bye.